Nature of Society Part 1, Session 9R. Last week we looked at the benefit that the communal due system can have in mitigating the problems associated with adverse impact on the environment that economic development brings. We summarized that the communal due would do the following. 1. Communities would become more compact and the phenomenon of urban sprawl would be mitigated. 2. These compact communities will lead to less expensive propositions for capital and recurrent expenditure with respect to roads, utilities, and drainage. 3. Less land development will be required so that the impact on the environment is less. 4. Planning of land use and environmental conservation is much easier with the communal due system. 5. The need to commute long distances will be eliminated as more viable communities are created with all the goods and services and employment opportunities available within. Did we have a look at this during the week? Is what is suggested here feasible in the outside world? This week we are going to restate the benefits to be derived from the communal due system, and we'll look at what Henry George, the famous 19th century economic philosopher, said about each particular benefit. The first benefit we state is 1. The communal due would discourage the holding from use of valuable idle land. This is what Henry George had to say. And I want to call your attention to what an enormous fund you would get for public purposes in this way. The chief advantage of putting taxes on land values is that you would choke off dogs in the manger, who are now holding land without using it, or making their forests of what ought to be homes of men, who, that they may compel a larger blackmail, are withholding land around your towns from building uses, while whole families are crowded in 4 storage homes, a family to each room. Actually, 4-story homes, a family to each room. Henry George, Scotland and Scotsmen. The second benefit stated is it would encourage development and redevelopment of lands as and when it becomes desirable. Henry George goes on to say, a great stimulus would be given to industry, to the investment capital, to production of all kinds by the removal of the taxes that weigh and press them down. You could establish libraries and museums, public parks and gardens, and theaters, if you choose, in every town. Again, this is from Scotland and Scotsmen, Henry George. The third benefit is stated as land could become available for use at its natural value and not at the monopoly prices prevailing. This would result in significant reductions in the start-off costs required for new businesses and other activities engaged in by man. Example, settlement, construction. Henry George said about this benefit, the way taxes raise prices is by increasing the cost of production and checking supply. But land is not a thing of human production, and taxes upon rent cannot check supply. Therefore, though a tax on rent compels the landowner to pay more, it gives them no power to obtain more for the use of their land, as it is in no way tending to reduce the supply of land. On the contrary, by compelling those who hold land on speculation to sell or let for what they can get, a tax on land values would tend to increase the competition between owners and thus reduce the price of land. It's taken from Progress and Poverty, Henry George. The fourth benefit is the communal due would result in a more just and equitable tax regime. It would be applied in line with ability to pay, and this application would result in the restoration to the community in general of the value which the community as a whole has created. On this, Henry George said, "The tax upon land values is the most just and equal of all taxes. It falls upon those who receive from society a peculiar and valuable benefit, and upon them in proportion to the benefit they receive. It is taking up by the community for the use of the community of that value which is the creation of the community. It is the application of the common property to common uses. When all rent is taken by taxation for the needs of the community, then will the equality ordained by nature be attained. No citizen will have an advantage over any other citizen, save as is given by his industry, skill, and intelligence, and each will obtain what he fairly earns. Then, but not till then, will labor get its full reward and capital its natural return." Taken from Progress and Poverty again by Henry George. Benefit number 5 is the introduction of the communal due would result in the increase in the establishment of new businesses and employment opportunities. There would be a widening of the tax base and a reduction in these objectionable taxes on labor and capital. Henry George says about this, "By the removal of the burdens that now weigh upon industry and thrift, if we tax houses, there will be fewer and poorer houses. If we tax machinery, there will be less machinery. If we tax trade, there will be less trade. If we tax capital, there will be less capital. If we tax savings, there will be less savings. All the taxes, therefore, that we should abolish are those that repress industry and lessen wealth. But if we tax land values, there will be no less land. On the contrary, the taxing of land values has the effect of making more land available for industry, and as a consequence, there will be much more businesses established." This is taken from The Single Tax, What It Is and Why We Urge It by Henry George. Benefit number 6. The introduction of the communal due in the end would result in the human being less dependent on the state for his or her material existence than is at present. Henry George says about this, "Here is a provision made by natural law for the increasing needs of social growth. Here is an adaptation of nature by virtue of which the natural progress of society is a progress towards equality, not towards inequality, a centripetal force tending to unity, growing out of an ever-balancing centrifugal force tending to diversity. Here is a fund belonging to society as a whole, from which, without the degradation of arms, private or public, provision can be made for the weak, the helpless, the aged, from which provision can be made for the common wants of all as a matter of common right to each." This is taken from Social Problems by Henry George. The last benefit is the communal due system would bring about a more efficient and effective revenue collection system. Henry George says about this, "The communal due would dispense with a whole army of tax gatherers and other officials, which present taxes require, and place in the treasury a much larger proportion of what it is taken from the people, while by making government simpler and cheaper, it would tend to make it purer. It would get rid of taxes which necessarily promote fraud, perjury, bribery, and corruption, which lead men into temptation, and which tax what the nation can least afford to spare, honesty and conscience. Since land lies out of doors and cannot be removed, and its value is the most readily ascertained of all values, the tax to which we would resort can be collected with the minimum of cost and the least strain on public morals. It's taken from Progress and Poverty. These are the 7 benefits of the communal due system. As we proceed on this course of the nature of society, we shall look at the practical proposals for the implementation of this regime. But for the time being, have a look at these benefits during the week and determine whether they are worthy of implementation. Come back with your observations for discussion. Let's have a short break now. To round off our session this evening, we would now like to list in point form what laws should be adopted on the statute books that would give effect to the communal due system. These are: 1. All men must be free to fulfill their desires, providing that in doing so, they do not interfere with another man's freedom. 2. Men must be free to work or not work according to his nature, provided that in doing so, they do not hamper another man's freedom. 3. Land must be freely available and must always remain so, for it is only through work on land that man's desire is satisfied. 4. For the holding of any land, the communal due must be paid to the community by the occupier, and the community must ensure security of tenure. 5. A holder of land, after paying the communal due, must be free to claim the full fruits of his skill and effort, as the communal due stands in place of all other taxes and levies. 6. The holder of land must keep the land in good condition. 7. The community must select suitable persons to assess, secure, and administer the communal due. 8. The community must care for those who are not able to care for themselves by an act of God and not desire. Before we end, I would like again to let you attendees know that Unsustainable Development is an educational offering devoted to the dissemination of its course to all of mankind, and to those who have the English language as their official language in the first instance, and to all eventually all over the world. To make this possible, and because we do not charge a fee for this dissemination, we rely wholeheartedly on monetary donations to meet the cost of achieving these goals. If you have found these sessions useful thus far and would like others to have access to them, we would gratefully accept your donations should you be inclined to offer them. You can send donations to our PayPal account at the email address nigelgittins@gmail.com. Thank you for your kind gesture.